Hello there. So I have been working on a project. The project that I've been working on is looking at the evolution of combat medics. Um, Full project is going from the Civil War to the Gulf War, but today we're going to be focusing on the training and we're going to be looking at two particular areas, which was the World War II and the Vietnam War. These are two areas where you see the changes that occur. One of the major things that we always have to understand is one, we'll kind of talk about the history in that, but also the how warfare works and what are the things that actually affect it. So when you look at warfare, I always use a triangle. Um, when you have the bottom portion of or the one side of the triangle, we are always looking at technology. Technology always changes and matches new innovations and new ideologies that come up, and to bring them into realization, we form new technology to make our lives easier and better, but we also, in that process, they find ways, of course, in certain technology to militarize it. This is what we then have the second side of this triangle, where the military ends up getting a hold of new technology. They then turn around, they make use for new weapons, new tactics to match the weapons. And this is where we kind of is where that point where I was talking about World War II, because World War II is off of World War One, which is where they introduce mechanized. World War II is where they perfect mechanized warfare. So the last portion is when you're looking at medicine. Medicine is always busy trying to catch up to the other two parts because medicine is always trying to cope and to take care of the wounded, because the purpose of military medicine is to patch up and heal the wounded. And they end up, one of the things that they discovered over time is the fact that the sooner you can get care to the wounded, the sooner that, or the better the chances they have of survival and or being put into the workforce to continue making products for the war, because warfare is total warfare. It's the whole society is all involved because you use industry to supply the military. Military then, of course, builds onto the war and so on and so forth. Um, why I use the Civil War? Civil War is actually where you actually have your first glimpse of one, total warfare, and its first signs where you see the introduction of modern United modern America. The Civil War is the first time that you have a large conscripted armies actually going off and fighting against one another and increasing. There's a large amount of wounded, sick, and dead. And of course, one of the things that they always get from all that is they actually managed to record as the doctors took care of all the wounded and everything else. One of the doctors in this time period would have been Dr. Jonathan Letterman. Letterman is one who is actually the father of what would be emergency medicine, military evacuation, military battlefield medicine. He is the guy who came up with the whole idea with the early evacuations and having actual assigned ambulances. Civil Wars were the first time that we actually have an ambulance out on the battlefield, or going into the battlefield to gather up the wounded and then hauling them out. Um, we have General Order 147. General Order 147 is the one who gives the composition of the ambulance, what is supposed to be on it, the crew that's supposed to be, which is going to be two enlisted and two officers, and they are going out. They're going to gather up the wounded, bring them back, and then of course the medical trains. You're going to have the actual two doctors who are actually going to be taking care of the wounded on the train, and this is where we start seeing also battlefield hospitals out near the front, which they then slowly keep moving them back, because one of the things that comes up into this, and this is why we have why combat medics actually come into being, is the fact that you have the doctors that take years to get trained. You have their college, then you have pre med, you have internship, and then you have residency, then they can become a doctor. This has been multiple years that this been going on, especially ones I'm more common and more versed in is, of course, the um, during the Vietnam and all that. But the same period, it takes multiple years to cover this progress. Medics, one of the things, so this is where we come into the training. So medics, where we said doctor takes years, medics are weeks. Depending on era, it's anywhere from an 8 weeks to no week training all the way up to 10 and more. So when you look at the combat medics, this is one of the things that they find that we start talking and looking at. World War II is where Civil War, of course, we just got done mentioning. Photos are compliment from Fort Sam Houston, the Army Military Medical Department Museum, and their archives. So this here is once we get into World War One is really where we should start go next. We actually start seeing the introduction of the aidmen, but we also have the ambulance going out there gathering up the wounded. You have some aidmen going out in the field taking care of them because, as I said, one of the biggest things that they find the sooner you get treatment to the wounded, the better, but you're not going to risk a doctor to go out there. You're going to send a aidman who's had weeks training over years. One of the other things, of course, is they start getting the early basic training, how to stop bleeding, use of, as we get into World War II, then we start having the introduction of sulfa powder. You start having the introduction of giving different antibiotics to try to deal with infections out in the field. World War II is also the introduction of penicillin, which is actually can be which one of the docs in the or one of the medics in the Pacific actually takes care of. Uh, but that training and that actually comes into where they start getting their on the job training. So they get that very basic early training before they get sent out there, which really is not enough to cover what they need to do. Uh, Robert Franklin, a World War II medic, he said that he had zero to none before he was actually thrown out into the thick of it and dealt with his actual point of he fought World War II with bandages, sulfa, and morphine. That was his treating of the wounded and to try to get them back when he could. Um, Later into when we start getting into Vietnam, and of course World War II is where we start seeing some different variants of the ambulance. Of course, you've seen the other version from World War One. This is World War II ambulance put out by Dodge, and of course, they did use jeeps for the purpose of moving wounded as well. Um, when we get into Vietnam, this is where we actually one of the things that always comes up is you when you look at the evolution of medics, you also have to realize the evolution of combat medics goes with the evolution of medicine. As medicine evolves, medics have to evolve to deal with new technology, new treatments, and everything that come into play. Um, but the basic the basic medical training, is always the same. They give them the basics in the early stages. Um, Other medics who are from Vietnam have stated where they had same issue, little to no training. First, Jim Pertel, he actually talks about the fact of having his first assignment. He was actually going out to be sent out into the field, and the primer cord actually exploded and blew a man's arm off, right because of the helicopter's electromagnetic charge setting off the cord. Um, he had to go deal with an instant amputation right there on no training other than the basic, and that was his first dealing of wounded. Um, You have other ones who talk about very little training as well, and they actually bring up the points of how they were trained in the hospital. They got hospital training as well as basic field training, and then they were sent out into combat to actually deal with the wounded out in the battlefield. Now, of course, as I said, they also had to learn how to load. As we then go into Vietnam, we start creating MASH hospitals. So now the chain has expanded outwards, and you end up having, but the role of the medic stays the same. Other than they have to learn how to load the patients onto helicopters, and in World War II, they were loading them onto the and airplanes to get them transported out of the Pacific to come back to mainland or go back to Hawaii, then to mainland. Same thing. They would have to, the transport was a longer distance. By Vietnam, we start actually incorporating, and actually, Korea is where we see the initial introduction of helicopters and the perfection in Vietnam. This always you see technology is introduced one war before and then perfected in the next war. Vietnam, we start seeing helicopters going out into the field, actually doing dust offs and pulling them off from battlefield, take them back to the MASH unit. MASH unit then would then treat them with as much treatment as they can, and then they get moved back into further hospitals and shipped stateside for final treatment. This is the evolution that you see when you look at the whole combat medics and combat medicine. Combat medics evolution always follows combat medicine.